And so now, I would like to introduce to you one of the 5 citizens who has brought forth this moratorium and even made this evening possible, Dr. Mark Sheehan. You're going to get laid. Just a second.
Oh, he is.
Okay. Oh.
All right. Thank you. It's been an interesting warm-up here this evening. And thank you for your patience, because I know many of you have been waiting to hear from from Jeffery Smith. In that video of the crowd, How to Start a Movement, for that first lone dancer, I think that one of that first lone dancer was Jeffery Smith. In 1996, when the gleam got into the eyes of some of the people who initiated this movement, there was one person who said, hey, something's not right about that. And he got on it and stayed on it. He wrote the book Seeds of Deception. It came out in 2003, and then 2007, Genetic Roulette, and on from there. He's been in 40 countries and around the world. I'm not going to spend any more time introducing him because he's the rock star of this movement. Please welcome Jeffery Smith.
I love Maui. Wow. It is incredible what you are creating right now. A loving community, bringing everyone with you to a healthy Aina and Keiki. Thank you, Maui, for showing the world. Last week, the citizens of Jackson County and Josephine County, Oregon, voted and banned the growing of GMOs in their counties. On the 8th of May, the governor of Vermont signed the bill requiring labeling of GMOs in their state. Last week, the Chinese army banned the use of GMOs in feeding the army. Earlier this month, Russia banned the planting of GMOs, restricted imports, and now will decide if growing GMOs and bringing them in is a terrorist act. The courts of France and Italy upheld their ban on planting GMOs. The courts in Mexico banned the planting of GMOs. And at the beginning of the year, it was announced that the original Cheerios and grape nuts are GMO, non-GMO for all of us. Now that last one, Cheerios and grape nuts, it may be that in 100 years, when they write about the history and what saved the genetic integrity of all living beings and all future generations, sales of grape nuts at Walmart. And I'm not joking. Consider this. In January 1999, at a biotech conference in San Francisco, Monsanto's consultant, Arthur Anderson, they were Enron's consultant also, described how they had worked with Monsanto executives by asking them, what's your ideal future in 15 to 20 years? And the executives described a world in which 100% of all commercial seeds were genetically engineered and patented. And Anderson worked backwards from that goal to create the strategy and tactics to achieve it. They were planning to replace nature, to eliminate the products of the billions of years of evolution and replace it with their designer organisms designed for their greater profit and control. A friend of mine who was in the audience said it was the most arrogant statement he'd ever heard in his life until that afternoon, when another company circulated a white paper projecting a 95% replacement of all commercial seeds within 5 years, by 2004. 3 weeks later, their schedule was derailed. The gag order was lifted on Dr. Arpad Pusztai, the world's leading scientist in his field. He had been given $3 million to figure out how to test for the safety of GMOs. He was a pro-GMO scientist, and to his surprise, GMOs turned out to be, in his words, inherently dangerous. The process of genetic engineering, the same process that's used to create the GM foods, in just 10 days, in rats he was studying, caused potentially precancerous cell growth, smaller brains, livers, and testicles, partial atrophy of the liver, and damaged immune system. He went public with concerns, was a hero for 2 days at his prestigious institute, and then the phone calls came. From the UK Prime Minister's office, forwarded through the receptionist to the director. The next day, Dr. Pusztai was fired after 35 years, silenced with threats of a lawsuit. 7 months and 1 heart attack later, February 16th, 1999, about 3 weeks after the San Francisco conference, the UK Parliament lifted his gag order. He was able to speak. Within a week, there were so many articles on GMOs. One editor wrote, "It has divided society into 2 warring blocks." Within a month, over 700 articles in the UK alone. And in 10 weeks, Unilever, Britain's largest food maker, said, "No more GMOs in Europe." The next day, Nestle's. The next week, everyone else in Europe. Because Project Censor described that whole event as one of the 10 most underreported events of the year in the United States. So we don't know about it. We didn't know about it. What's a GMO? No one knew. So McDonald's, Burger King, Nestle's, all of them removed GMOs over there where they knew about it and kept feeding us GMOs. About 8 years ago, word got out about bovine growth hormone and its link to cancer. Monsanto scientists knew about it. In fact, a former Monsanto scientist told me 3 of his colleagues who did the safety studies on the milk from treated cows treated with bovine growth hormone, genetically engineered, they found so much cancer-promoting hormone in the milk, IGF-1, that the Monsanto scientists refused to drink milk thereafter unless it was organic. One of them bought his own cow. It had been banned in Canada, EU, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and then it was banned in Walmart's milk, and Starbucks, and Yoplait, and Danone, and most American dairies. A tipping point of consumer rejection. We saw that word earlier in the video, a tipping point. First in Europe, then bovine growth hormone. Now, we have been educating people about the health dangers of GMOs in order to inspire healthier non-GMO choices. And we have got it down, and we'll show you what that looks like tonight. And by educating and by educating and by educating, who are the early adapters? The health-conscious consumers. Those who already buy based on their internal list of yeses and nos and yeses and nos based on what they know or believe to be healthy. And we tipped. Last year, we tipped the natural food industry in the United States. GMOs became a marketing liability. President of Whole Foods in March said when a product becomes non-GMO project verified, it increases sales by 15 to 30%. Imagine you're selling in Whole Foods or any natural products space, and you hear that sales are increasing by 15 to 30% by putting a non-GMO project verified seal. And you don't have one. Really. It didn't take a lot of brain cells to figure out what to do next. thousands of companies enrolled in the non-GMO project, not waiting for the 2018 requirement by Whole Foods for their labeling. They did not want to lose market share. So 17,000 products are verified, and more than 10,000 are in the pipeline waiting. Grape nuts and Cheerios. Not sold in Whole Foods, not sold in the natural food industry, not sold in Monas, hopefully. What happens if their sales increase? Now, which we look at the products, Cheerios was kind of a defensive measure, staving off 50,000 posts on its Facebook page by GMO Inside and all of us. So they put a non-GMO statement on the side of the package where no one can see it as they're walking by. Grape nuts, however, front of the package, non-GMO project verified. Cheerios, we're not going to tell you why we're calling it non-GMO. It's private. Grape nuts, non-GMO project verified, front of package. Now, it's not the most perfect test case because it's unique in its texture and its flavor. If there were like a generic cornflakes next to Kellogg's, that would be a real good test. But we got the grape nuts. Now, if grape nuts increases market share, you didn't think I was going to be talking about grape nuts tonight, right? What? Isn't he going to talk about GMOs? Yes, in a minute. If it increases market share, suppose you're running a brand in the conventional food space and you realize grape nuts just declared itself non-GMO and it increased market share for reducing the market share of its competitors. What are you going to do? As fast as possible, become non-GMO before anyone else in your product space to steal their market share, and certainly not waiting until your competitor goes first and steals yours. This right now, this window where you have Cheerios and grape nuts, Target home brands are going to be non-GMO by the end of the year. Ben & Jerry's, Chipotle's, it's actually happening. But we have this low-hanging non-GMO fruit. And if it increases market share, the avalanche follows, the European-style avalanche, and none too soon, because the goal of the biotech industry back in 1999 has only expanded. It's not just 100% of the commercial seeds now. They want to release genetically modified mosquitoes in the Florida Keys. They've already released them in Malaysia, Brazil, and the Cayman Islands. They want to approve genetically modified salmon. They've already genetically engineered all types of livestock and at least 35 types of fish somewhere in the pipeline. It's not just the seeds, it's basically everything that they can make a buck from. So it really is replacing nature. And these are the two worlds we're looking at right now. The Monsanto ideal future and nature. And it's so weird that it's going to come down perhaps to grape nuts in Walmart. That's the context. That's the context within which we find ourselves in Maui. Because here, it's much more concentrated. I want to find out a few things about the audience. How many people here are farmers? Raise your hand. Give a hand to the farmers, please. Yes. Now covered by the Endangered Species Act. Thank you so much, farmers. How many people are gardeners? Raise your hand. Okay, give yourselves a hand, gardeners. How many people eat? Let's see. Almost everyone. How many people have no problem eating GMOs? Raise your hand. I'm looking for the Monsanto plants. Okay, we got a couple. All right, how many people are worried about eating GMOs? All right, family. All right, so I want to ask you to rate yourself from 1 to 100 how vigilant you've been at avoiding GMOs. Okay? 1 is not vigilant at all, like what's a GMO? 100 is very vigilant, okay? And this is not only at home, but also going out to restaurants, eating at friends' houses, going to movie theaters. Most Americans are in the lowest category, 0 to 20. How many are in that category? Raise your hand. Bold. Raise your hand high. Keep them up. Look around. We want to go. This is a pre-test for the audience. Okay, 20 to 40. Who's 20 to 40? Raise your hand. 40 to 60. Raise your hand. 60 to 80. Raise your hand. 80 to 100. Raise your hand. You guys are amazing. Anyway, now rate yourself from 1 to 100. How active you've been talking about GMOs to others. Not very active. 1 to 20. Raise your hand. 1 to 20. 20 to 40. 40 to 60. 60 to 80. 80 to 100, and those who've been talking about, petition gathering, 120. Okay, so that's a pretest. We're going to see how you feel about what you want to do next week in terms of avoiding GMOs and talking about it. I want to start by asking you guys some questions. How many of you, and raise your hand and keep it up for people to look at, how many of you, when you switched to a largely non-GMO diet, had some improvement in your health? Please raise your hand. Look around, okay? Look at all the hands. Look at all the hands, okay? Now, this is very common for the number of people who've gotten rid of GMOs. Okay, you can put your hands down. Now, I want to hear what symptoms got better or went away. Now, I can tell you from doing this 95 times what you're going to say, but I think it's funner to hear from you. Better energy. How many people more energy? Yes, that is one of the most common experiences. Next. Better digestion. How many people better digestion? That is the most common experience. So we're talking about irritable bowel, inflammatory bowel, acid reflux, etc., etc. Blood sugar. How many people notice the change in blood sugar? Not as common, but it comes up regularly. Less pain. Anyone less pain? Okay. One woman yelled out once, erectile dysfunction. I instantly said, okay, raise your hand if you've gotten rid of erectile dysfunction. All right. I didn't get it. Next symptom. Clear thinking. Okay, that went from brain fog. What were we talking about? Brain fog to clear thinking. Raise your hand. Okay. Next. Better sleep, raise your hand. Okay, we'll talk about melatonin in a few minutes. Next. Less allergies, thank you. I had to show allergies. Allergies, every single group I've talked to except one, allergies came up. How about asthma? Anyone? Asthma? All right, next. Headaches, how about headaches? Okay. Skin problems. Yes, many people. I'm surprised how many people had said skin problems. How about this? Ready? Losing weight. After non-GMO, yes, very common. I should have asked that first. More people would have converted. Anything else? You don't have to say all your symptoms, your personal history. So this is actually extremely common. Now, for years I was representing scientists, translating what they said, writing it out, showing it to them, saying, is this correct? They said yes. Then I'd show it to other scientists and make sure the scientists agree. Then I would publish it. And so I was very, very conservative in what I would say. Do you know how a scientist speaks? Okay, I'm going to make fun of the scientists here. I'll make fun of you. Dr. Ritter, wasn't he awesome? Awesome. This humble guy. Yeah, like 20 years ago I worked on birth defects. When I was 19, I gave a talk. I built a ship, the cruise ship. I traveled in the... I was in the space shuttle. I was the 37th president of the United States. You are awesome, man. But I'm totally going to make fun of you. These are how most scientists talk, okay? Converging lines of evidence suggest that I'm chilly. And so I was like, still am in a large way. Evidence suggests that. It appears that. GMOs may do this, could be doing this, and I'm very cautious. But I started in 2006 presenting the evidence to the medical community, and they started prescribing non-GMO diets, now by the thousands. And one medical organization, the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, they were the first group to acknowledge or identify Gulf War syndrome, food allergies, chemical sensitivity, more than a dozen other standard issues or practices. I gave a talk there 3 years in a row, and I said, why don't you guys do your own investigation on GMOs? And they did, and they came out with a policy saying that the animals fed GMOs have problems with gastrointestinal, does that sound familiar? Immune system problems, yeah? Reproductive problems, I've also heard some of that, correct? Organ damage, accelerated aging, dysfunctional regulation of cholesterol and insulin. They said every doctor should prescribe non-GMO diets to every patient, May 2009, based on existing studies. They said it's not casual, it's a causal relationship. So I went to give a fourth talk, fourth year in a row at AEM, and I brought a video camera. And I started interviewing the doctors, and they didn't speak like scientists. They said GMOs cause inflammation. An allergist said, GMOs cause my allergic patients to have more allergies and more severe. One woman said, I prescribe non-GMO diets to everyone, they all get better. I went, what? You know, up until this point, people had been coming to me and saying, oh, I'm definitely sensitive to GMOs, and I was skeptical. My original, and for years, I'd go, yeah, how do they know? It was interesting. I just felt like you'd see some kind of trend if you could ever do epidemiological studies. It's sort of like a gentle push in the direction of a disease type. So when someone said that they're sensitive to GMOs, it's like, well, you know, they say that they don't react to the same foods in Europe, or they don't react to the same foods that are organic. But I was always kind of skeptical, and it wasn't scientific. But I realized when I asked this doctor, I said, how many people have you prescribed non-GMO diets to? She figured it out, she said about 5,000. And I realized they do more experiments than the scientists, but they experiment on us. And they prescribe a non-GMO diet, and they see the results. And they see the people that don't take the diet, and they take the results, and they see the people that do take the diet. So they're actually have incredible conviction. When I take a doctor on stage with me, as I have, from a local audience, says, okay, naturopath, okay, doctor, okay, dietitian, nutritionist, come up and tell your experience. They're like this, you know, this stuff is killing it. I have so new diseases that are complicated coming up in the last few years, and we know that it's GMO related. Now, their conviction is they speak with more confidence than I can, because they are doing the experiments, they're on the front line. Now, the thing is, when I went to the doctor's offices and I talked to their patients, and one person in 25 days lost 10 pounds on a non-GMO diet, her Crohn's disease symptoms dropped in 3 days. Your skin conditions were clearing up. Another irritable bowel person eliminated in 3 weeks. Another person in 6 weeks, a 12-year-old, no more inhaler, no more migraine headaches. A 9-year-old, no more intense pain. I had all sorts of things like this. But the next question is, how do you avoid GMOs? So how do you avoid GMOs? That's right, buy organic. One of the things is you buy organic. As soon as you buy organic, you're not just getting rid of GMOs, you're getting rid of atrazine and dozens of other nasties. So is it the non-GMO or is it the other stuff? What's another way to avoid GMOs? Grow your own, move to Europe, right. Okay, everyone, let's go, come on. We're halfway there. No, that's the wrong direction. Move to Asia. So grow your own or buy whole, less processed foods. Now, if you do that, you get rid of far more than you get rid of when you're buying organic, because you get rid of the colorings, the additives. Some people switch to gluten-free at the same time. Some people take out dairy. I throw up my hands and says, I can't deal with this. This is so unscientific. It's how we live, but it's unscientific. The same time I visited the doctor's offices, I also started visiting farms and veterinarians that had taken their livestock from GM soy and corn to non-GM soy and corn. There weren't any gluten-free pigs, no dairy-free cows, no cofactors, just one change. Ib Pedersen from Denmark didn't tell his farmhand he was putting the pigs on non-GMO soybeans. But the farmhand came to him in 2 days and said, you changed the feed. He said, uh-oh, why? No more diarrhea. 2 days, they had intractable, often fatal diarrhea. 2 days gone. Now, the pig farmer calls it diarrhea. In the Chicago office, when I interviewed the patients and the doctors, they called it irritable bowel. The pigs in 2 days, the patients in 3 weeks or 6 weeks. No more birth defects, no more deaths from ulcers or bloat. These relate to the gastrointestinal disorders that we're seeing in the people. Higher conception rate, we've seen that. Increased litter size, doesn't translate that well. Twins, no, it's not something you want to promote. By the way, bovine growth hormone probably promotes twins. In 2006, in May, in a Journal of Reproductive Medicine, a person compared the twinning rate in the UK and the US and determined that the increased fraternal twin rate in the US was probably due to bovine growth hormone in the milk supply. Where was we? So we have a situation where the livestock were showing the same changes as the humans and the same categories as the American Academy of Environmental Medicine found in the lab animals. I talked to a guy in western Iowa. He was continuing to feed GM soy to his 3,000 pigs, but he just switched to non-GM corn. And he was walking with his brother, and 3 days into the non-GM corn experiment, they noticed the pigs were acting different. He said, must be that non-GMO corn. It was a joke until 8 days later when he called the person who told him to remove GM food. And he described an amazing experience, a revelation that completely changed his thinking. 14 years ago and earlier, his brothers would always joke with him that he had the easiest job on the farm because he was taking care of the nursery with the 3,000 pigs. But starting 14 years ago, it became the most difficult time on the farm because they got so sick. And they were all so sickly. They would lie on the ground all day. He'd come into the stalls, then they'd get up. Before he even left the stalls, they'd be on the ground again. So now, cue music, now the pigs dance. And they put on little, no, what they, you switch to a non-GMO, it works. So within the first 11 days, the pigs started getting up and playing like piglets, and the use of the medicines dropped by 3/4. And the antibiotics dropped in Pedersen's farm by 2/3. So we see the difference in the animals. Now we're hearing from pet owners, dogs and cats, and from veterinarians. So we see the same categories of diseases and disorders in the lab animals, getting better in humans, including those here. Most of you are humans. Then we have pets, livestock, and these are on the rise in the U.S. population. Bruce, I need the lights. On the rise in the U.S. population since GMOs were introduced. Now, the correlational slides I'm about to show you do not prove causation. But if GMOs are causing these things, then these charts are very strong support and would be largely expected. So, deaths from senile dementia, as you see on the chart behind me, there's a red line, just imagine it, a red line that goes up, and it says glyphosate. How many people know what glyphosate is? This is probably the highest concentration of glyphosate knowers in the country. Glyphosate is yeah, I know, you're breathing it, same as we. So glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup. Okay, now Roundup, just like the doctor said, they only test for the individual glyphosate active ingredient by the EPA. Just a minute. They only test for the glyphosate for its toxicity, but there are elements inside Roundup that are 10,000 times more toxic than the glyphosate. And when you put it all together, Roundup is 125 times more toxic than glyphosate alone. But this shows the line here of glyphosate, and this is deaths from senile dementia. This is deaths from Parkinson's disease. Now, this one has added GMO soy and corn acreage, okay? This is diabetes. Now, before glyphosate was introduced, this was the trend line, flat. If you remove that, this chart looks like that. This is, what is that? Hospital admissions for acute kidney injury. This is end-stage kidney disease. This is kidney and pelvic cancer. This is thyroid cancer. This is liver and bile duct cancer. These cancers on the top are on the increase in the US, and they happen to be the target tissues for glyphosate. This is hepatitis C, high blood pressure, autism, low birth weight babies, inflammatory bowel, chronic constipation, death to intestinal infection, peritonitis, obesity, rheumatoid arthritis. And this is, which is more related to environmental issues, the celiac disease on the rise in a children's hospital in farmland, where there's also a correlational rise in Roundup-ready canola. So these are the correlations. But how can we explain these with GMOs? If we just look at the two main toxins, glyphosate and Roundup, and Bt toxin, that can explain all of these problems. Let's start with Bt toxin. There was a bunch of farmers and gardeners in here. How many people use or have used Bt spray as an insecticide? Raise your hand, okay? So when you look on the spray bottle and you look on the side, does it say use as a mouthwash? It says gargle twice a day? Take internally? No, it doesn't say take internally. In fact, experts say it might have effects on people, especially certain weak people who are predisposed with immune conditions. Mice exposed to the Bt toxin have had immune responses and tissue damage. Humans exposed to Bt spray have had immune system reactions. The Scientists Advisory Panel of the EPA said there's clear demonstrations of immune system reactions that need to be investigated. Bt toxin is basically bacteria from the soil. You take the bacteria, you take the spores, you put it together, you spray it. It breaks open the stomach of insects to kill them, but then it washes off. It biodegrades. It's not on the food we eat. It's approved in organic agriculture as a natural insecticide. But the genetic engineers take the gene from the soil bacteria, Bt for Bacillus thuringiensis, pull the gene out, make millions of copies, put it into a gun, shoot the gun into a plate of millions of cells, clone those cells into a plant, and now every gene of every plant that's genetically engineered has a little gene-sized spray bottle, which also doesn't say use as a mouthwash. It produces the Bt toxin at thousands of times the concentration. It's designed to be more toxic than the natural spray. Now, the excuse given by the EPA, which ignored its science advisory panel, was that Bt toxin is completely safe for humans and all mammals, that it only kills or only has any biological impact on certain insects. That has been, I would say, I don't use this word very often, proven false. By taking the Bt toxin and exposing it to animals and humans and showing a change, seeing binding in the gut. In fact, they took the Bt toxin and exposed it to human cells in a laboratory, and it poked the little holes in those cells that it normally uses to kill insects. So if we just look at the Bt toxin in corn chips that we eat, what can that explain? First of all, it could explain immune reactions, like allergies. When the mice were fed the Bt toxin, they not only reacted to the toxin, they started to react to formerly harmless compounds. So it increased their sensitivity. So you eat corn chips from Bt corn, you might start to react to other things if the mouse studies translate into human experience. Now, what about the hole poking? What if we eat this Bt toxin and it starts to poke holes along our digestive tract? Remember the gastrointestinal disorders in there? There's others in there, as well as irritable bowel, other slides we don't have here. That might explain the gastrointestinal disorders. What if there's holes in the gut wall, which it does for insects? It's only one cell thick. What if it creates holes? Now, normally, nearly all the stuff that gets into the blood is broken down to be eensy-beensy, eensy-teensy, small. It's been a long time since I did Eensy Weensy Spider, but I still remember the hand movements. If it gets into the blood, normally it's small pieces, but if it becomes undigested food proteins, big ones, then it becomes attacked by the immune system, which can cause inflammation, food allergies. And what happens is all of the components of our immune system, just like all of our citizens have little iPhones, and they come out and they take pictures of these undigested food proteins and they put it on the intranet inside the body so that the rest of the immune system has the mugshot and says, anything you see that looks like this, attack. But because of molecular mimicry, those large proteins look like the thyroid, look like the microvilli, look like the pancreas, and you get autoimmune disease. So one of the most consistent symptoms for autoimmune disease is leaky gut, where you have these undigested food proteins triggering an attack on the body itself. Leaky gut is also linked to autism, cancer, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and many other problems. So, all of those on that list up there, that could be explained by Bt toxin, but it gets a little worse. You see, not only are you letting undigested food proteins into the blood, you're letting Bt toxin into the blood. So it drills a hole and jumps in. A mouse study found that Bt toxin exposed to the mice was cytotoxic. It was toxic to the red blood cells. It gets worse. They found the Bt toxin in the blood of 93% of the pregnant women tested in Canada and 80% of their unborn fetuses. So if the Bt toxin gets into the circulating blood of a fetus and passes the non-existent blood-brain barrier, it can end up in the brain of the unborn fetus where it might be poking holes in cells. Now, if the Bt toxin washes out on a regular basis, as it should, as scientists agree that it would, why would the Canadian pregnant women have 93% hit rate on Bt toxin? They're not in Mexico eating corn tortillas every day. Most of the corn that they eat is too refined to even contain Bt toxin. High fructose corn syrup, dextrose, that doesn't contain Bt toxin. The protein portion is gone. So the scientists speculated that the source, the frequent source of Bt, was milk and meat, because the animals eat Bt corn every day. I think there is a better explanation. This came from a 2004 study. And I'm going to digress a bit and explain what they were looking for. The FDA was very concerned about GMOs. They said GMOs, the process, that shooting the gun into the plate of cells, cloning them into plants, that can create massive collateral damage in the DNA, hundreds or thousands of mutations. So irrespective of what gene you put in, you may turn on a oncogene causing a carcinogen or a toxin or an allergen. In fact, that happened in Monsanto's most popular Bt corn. It turned on a silent gene that produces an allergen. So some people may have an allergic reaction to Monsanto's corn, even though there's no labeled difference. In Monsanto's soy, there's as much as a 7-fold increase in a known soy allergen. This is the collateral damage. Now, when they shoot the genes into the plate of cells, they don't want to grow 1 million cells into 1 million plants. They just want to grow the cells that got the gene in there. So they also put in, or had in the past, an antibiotic-resistant marker gene. This gene produces a protein that creates invincibility at the cell level to a certain type of antibiotic. And they put that in there along with the Bt gene and shoot the whole genetic construct as a unit into the cells so that they can then add antibiotics into that dish, and it kills all of the cells except the very few that have the gene in it functioning. Now you have an antibiotic-resistant marker gene that's in every cell of the genetically engineered crop that gets grown out and is now planted on millions and millions of acres. And what did the FDA say about antibiotic-resistant marker genes? All capital letters. It would be a serious health hazard. Can anyone guess why? because if it transfers to bacteria, and genes swap, bacteria swaps genes all the time. If it transfers into disease-creating bacteria, that disease-creating bacteria could be resistant to antibiotics. So antibiotic-resistant diseases, which are on this island big time, and by the way, a lot of the sprays that they use, Roundup, antibiotics. You're getting pummeled by antibiotics. The overuse of antibiotics increases antibiotic-resistant diseases. So they were concerned that it would transfer to bacteria inside the gut. But they were told, don't worry, genes are destroyed during digestion. No worries about gene transfer. So the only, someone mentioned, there's no human feeding studies. There was one human feeding study on current commercialized genetically modified soy. One human feeding study, one meal. And they fed them soy burgers and soy milkshake, and they fed them to 7 volunteers. Brilliant study. These volunteers had their lower intestines removed. They used an olostomy bag. It wasn't removed for the study. They had an olostomy bag, and they fed them the soy burger and the soy milkshake, and then they looked in the bag and they found, oh my goodness, guess what? Not all the genes were destroyed during passage through the stomach and small intestine. In that bag was genetically engineered DNA. But in 3 of the 7 volunteers, before they were fed the meal, inside the gut bacteria in their bodies, which is now in the bag, the Roundup Ready gene, or part of it, was now it had transferred into the DNA of bacteria. And that bacteria was unkillable with Roundup, suggesting, but not proving, suggesting that it was functioning. In other words, long after you stop eating GMOs, you may have genetically engineered proteins produced by your own intestinal flora. Now, there was only 3 of 7 in the UK that had this, but the UK, in the study, they don't eat a lot of genetically engineered soy over there. So it may be a much higher hit rate. We may be colonizing the gut bacteria. In fact, I give this lecture, and sometimes there's a person in the audience who wants to challenge me, as someone did, and said, Mr. Smith is a fearmonger. We eat DNA all the time. No problem. If we transferred, we would turn green from the greens we would eat. We'd have photosynthesis. I loved it. It was like throwing me a slow-motion softball. I said, thank you very much for your intelligent response. Whew. Yes, you're absolutely right. We eat DNA all the time. And plant DNA, unlike bacterial DNA, they don't swap genes back and forth. In fact, there are natural barriers that prevent genes from transferring from plant DNA to bacterial DNA. They look different. There's no similarity. But the genes that they insert into genetically engineered crops are from bacteria. So that barrier is dismantled. Now, when plant genes, if they did transfer to bacteria, the on switch, the promoter, doesn't work. Plant promoters don't work in bacteria. But the promoters, the on switch that they insert into GM crops, are from viruses, and it works in bacteria. Now, in plants, in higher organisms like humans and corn, inside the gene, there's little things called introns that it has to be removed in order for the thing to produce a protein. And so if it transferred from a plant, the bacteria says, what's all this? I can't deal with this. Next. But there's none of those inside the genes that they insert into the genetically engineered crops. In other words, summarizing for those that are like, I hate science, I'm not going to follow this, what's he talking about? There's some natural barriers that prevent genes from transferring from plants to bacteria that have been removed in genetic engineering. So we may be colonizing the gut bacteria. Now, this study on Roundup Ready soy showing the transfer was funded in part by the UK government. They were the ones that stopped Arpad Pusztai and trashed his reputation and got him fired, and they were not about to fund any follow-up studies. So they pulled the funding, and they never checked to see if the Bt gene from corn chips transfers into the DNA of gut bacteria and continues to function. Because if it does, it means it's turned our intestinal bacteria into living pesticide factories, producing Bt toxin 24/7. And that might explain why 93% of the pregnant women in Canada had Bt toxin in their blood, because they are producing it themselves. A UK advisor to the government wrote a letter to the FDA. I don't normally say this, but you can see in a moment why I'm telling you this in Maui. Wrote a letter to the FDA before the FDA had created a policy on GMOs and said, if people breathe the pollen from genetically engineered crops, the DNA may transfer to bacteria in the respiratory system. Now, we know from a study done in Germany that bees, when they collect pollen from corn, the gene transferred into the microorganisms inside their gut. So that's one of the issues with dust. So what we've talked about right now is just Bt toxin, but it has stiff competition from Roundup in the Roundup Ready crops. Most of the GMO crops are Roundup Ready. Roundup Ready. Interesting history here. Monsanto scientists found bacteria growing in a chemical waste dump not dying in the presence of Roundup, which usually kills bacteria. So they said, great, let's put it in the food supply. So they took the gene from the bacterium and that allowed it to survive and put it into soybeans. And now you can spray the soybeans with Roundup, but they're Roundup Ready. They drink it for breakfast, and they keep 80 to 85% of it inside the plant, stored in things like, the soybean, or the corn kernel for Roundup Ready corn, and we eat it. Now, Roundup was originally patented in 1964 as a broad-spectrum herbicide. No, wrong. Let me say that again. Roundup was patented in 1974 as a broad-spectrum herbicide. In 1964, it was patented as a broad-spectrum chelator. Chelation. How many people know what chelation is? Okay. Usually, chelation is a good thing. Let's get something that chelates those heavy metals out of our bodies. It'll grab it, it'll hug it, it won't let go, and it'll usher it out. But Roundup chelates all of the minerals, the nutrients, the cations, the zinc, the magnesium, the manganese. And the way that it kills is interesting. If you take a plant in sterile soil and you spray Roundup on it, glyphosate, just glyphosate we're talking, you will stunt the plant. You will not kill it. You will stunt it because it won't have the minerals for a while, and then it'll get the minerals in it. It'll change its shape. But then it'll continue to grow. But out in the field, that same plant, or even in a field soil, will die. Here's why. It deprives the plant of key nutrients, trace minerals that are the locks and keys for metabolic processes. Without those minerals, the plant is weak and sick and defenseless against disease. In sterile soil, it's sitting there defenseless against disease, but there's no disease around. In field soil, not only do you have disease, but Roundup promotes the growth of soil-borne pathogens, like Fusarium. Over 40 plant diseases on the rise in the U.S. can be identified as being caused by Roundup's use. In addition, it kills beneficial bacteria in the soil, which normally transfer certain nutrients so that they can be assimilated by the plant, and it keeps the population of the fungus in check. That's gone. It also, the bacteria, creates a spongy basis for the soil so it can absorb water. So now it's more compactified. But getting back to how it kills, it promotes the soil-borne pathogens that kill the weak and sick plant. Now, as an aside, I don't normally talk about this, but we're on Maui. If it's promoting Fusarium, which is known to produce mycotoxins or other fungal diseases, those mycotoxins have been known for centuries to be responsible for huge outbreaks of diseases, where the grains of a civilization caused serious disorders. That's breathable. A friend of mine, Howard Vlieger, tested the air quality in a soy field and a cornfield from GMO Roundup-ready crops. Sent it into a lab. It came back with a warning and saying, this is extremely dangerous. They didn't know where it was from. They said, if you spend any time in this environment, wear a mask and get out quickly. That's a field. That's where Maui citizens spend their days. And that's where, on certain wind patterns, Maui citizens breathe. Now, you end up with weak and sick plants with residues of Roundup that are eaten by the animals. They eat mostly Roundup-ready crops in the United States: soy, corn, cotton, canola, sugar beets, alfalfa. That's their lunch and dinner. And they end up becoming nutrient deficient. There's almost a universal deficiency of things like manganese because of the Roundup use. Now, we eat the weak and sick plants and the weak and sick animals and the residues of Roundup that can further chelate or bind with our minerals, making them unfunctioning. And so we can become weak and sick. Now, one of the things that it does is, because it deprives certain minerals that are key to what's called the shikimate pathway. The shikimate pathway is used by plants, and because it blocks the shikimate pathway, it kills, that's what, it makes the plant weak and sick. Monsanto said, humans don't have the shikimate pathway. Roundup is safe. Our gut bacteria uses the shikimate pathway to produce aromatic amino acids like L-tryptophan. L-tryptophan is the precursor to serotonin and also to melatonin. If we don't have enough tryptophan, we don't have enough serotonin or melatonin. Serotonin and melatonin are important. If you don't have enough serotonin, you may end up depressed, irritable, and unable to say, I'm full. It gives the satiation response. So maybe it promotes obesity, depression, aggression. Melatonin, sleep. Someone mentioned sleep problems. It also, Roundup, is a potent antibiotic. It kills beneficial gut bacteria, not the bad stuff, not the salmonella, E. coli, botulism. It kills the lactobacillus, the bifidobacteria, the stuff we buy in health food stores. It kills it. And it causes, that could cause, and does with animals, and probably humans, an overgrowth of negative gut bacteria. Now, with an overgrowth of negative gut bacteria, it produces very, very toxic gas, which can be a problem to the walls of the cells. It produces zonulin, which then can create holes between the cells in the gut walls. So now you have leaky gut and gastrointestinal problems, but Roundup also can, just like BT, we didn't talk about it, can destroy or damage the microvilli, which do the digesting in the digestive tract. Roundup has also been shown to suppress digestive enzymes. So the entire digestive process, the structure of the tube, the intestines, the integrity of that, all of that can be hurt by Roundup. In addition, it blocks another metabolic pathway, or it inhibits it, called the P450 cytochrome pathway, which creates CYP enzymes which help the liver to detox. So the doctor was talking about combining the effects of two different toxins. If you take glyphosate or Roundup, it blocks the elimination, or it inhibits the elimination of toxins from the liver. So all the other toxins can be more toxic. It's also an endocrine disruptor. Rats that were fed the Roundup, the females had more testosterone, the males had more estrogen. It blocks the aromatase. It's also promoting cancer. It promotes growth of breast cells at parts per trillion. So if you just look at Roundup, it can explain nearly all the things that we saw earlier tonight. In fact, two scientists did a review paper and just looked at the biochemical properties of glyphosate and linked it to cancer, heart disease, obesity, diabetes, autism, reproductive disorders, gastrointestinal problems, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, kidney failure, and gluten sensitivity, to name a few. So if we look at the two main toxins in GMOs, they could explain all that we talked about. If we look at the process of creating a genetically engineered food, that might create the problems. And let's just, Bruce, can we turn on the thing one more time? There's some of you are visual learners, and your memory of tonight will be like, don't eat GMOs, that's all I remember. So for the visual learners, I want to burn some images in you, and then we're going to end up with good news. Now, I understand that this part of my talk, I name it Death, Disease, Destruction, and Despair. But we come out with good news, and I'm also going to, but I have to give you a little bit more bad news because I just came from Kauai. And I tell you what's going to happen there, what will happen here if it goes like Kauai did. Okay, livers, one of my favorite organs. So there is the liver of rats fed GM soy and the liver of rats fed non-GM soy. The technical term is gnarly. These are testicles that changed from pink to blue in rats that were fed GM soy. Testicles of mice fed GM soy had damage, including damage to the young sperm cells. Uterus and ovaries of rats fed GM soy were also altered. Even the offspring of mice in the embryo stage, the DNA functioned differently when their moms and dads had GM soy compared to non-GM soy. Let's see. This slide was given to me by Dr. Irina Ermakova, as well as the next few slides. She's from the Russian Academy of Sciences, so these are Russian-speaking rats. And we were speaking at the EU Parliament, and she described how when she discovered what you're about to see, she was immediately attacked and defamed and criticized and under pressure from her boss, because of his boss. She couldn't do any more GMO research. All she did was feed, they volunteered for a GM soy experiment, the female rats. They were fed GM soy starting 2 weeks before they got pregnant, and more than half of their babies died within 3 weeks. Only 10% died when they were eating non-GM soy. They were also smaller and could not reproduce. Okay, another one, hamsters by the third generation on GM soy, most were sterile. They died at 4 or 5 times the rate, and some had hair growing in their mouths. So these are rats that had massive multiple tumors in 2 years. Up to 80% of the female rats had tumors, up to 50% of the male rats, compared to a much lower rate, 10 to 30% in the controls. There was also damage to the pituitary, liver, and kidney, and early death 2 or 3 times. This is stomachs of pigs on the right, fed GM crops, severe inflammation compared to normal stomachs on the left. I think that's it, yeah. I'd like you to rate yourself from 1 to 100 how vigilant you'll be next week at avoiding GMOs. How many people plan to be low vigilance? 0 to 20, raise your hand now. 20 to 40? 40 to 60? 60 to 80? 80 to 100. Whew. For the cameras, nearly the 80 to 100 have it. How active do you want to be at talking about GMOs? Low active, 1 to 20, raise your hand. 20 to 40? 40 to 60? 60 to 80? 80 to 100. Whew. Give yourselves a hand. So the same information that changes behavior also spontaneously goes viral. Now, we ask, how do we stop the genetic engineering of the food supply? We started with that. We started with the grape nuts offensive. So how do you get the Walmart shopper? Well, first of all, we don't have to appeal to the couch potato junk food eating American who hasn't yet realized that food relates to health. He'll never know that he's eating a GMO. He'll never know we got rid of it for him. We go to targeted demographic groups who have built-in triggers that we know exactly what they are, who they are, what they need to hear. I've talked to groups like this, over 100,000 people in the audience, 10 years ago on Maui, we had tens of people coming to the talks. It's growing. And you know, the targeted demographic group that's most sensitive? Moms. Yes, let's hear it for moms. Another form of moms, pet owners. Chronically ill people suffering from some of these diseases. And healthcare professionals treating these people. And finally, the faith-based community that believes GMO means God move over. So our organization has a 5-year plan to eliminate GMO food and feed from the US and most countries this way. We're looking for big funding, and if anyone has interest in giving big funding, we have a need for $4 to $5 million a year for 5 years, and we will deliver on our plans to end GMOs. So I want to share with you before Q&A, I want to talk about the Shaka movement. I want to give my perspective from it, and I want to give a little bit of research I did in Kauai. They have 16,000 acres planted, and Maui County has 3,000. We talked about two futures for the world at the beginning of the talk, the replacement of nature and nature. But where they grow this stuff, the two futures are far more intense. It's paradise or poison. You have a situation where they grow on a 4-season rotation. So the amount of pesticide exposure compared to where I live in Iowa is 4 times. It's constant. In fact, in Kauai, they spray 65% of the days of the year, sometimes 80%, depending on the year. If you go to Waimea, they spray up on the top of a hill during inversion climate episodes. It just sits. Some people will cover their windows, cover their doors, and then tape plastic over their toaster and toaster oven because the yellow powder will get into their house, and they don't want to get it on their food. In that small area, they've counted at least 88 cancers. There is a lawsuit. It's been going on for 13 years. A faculty member of the Waimea Middle School said he came to his aquaculture experiment in 2004, and all the fish were dead in 2 main tanks. Monsanto's field was right next door. They didn't do an investigation. The Department of Agriculture didn't take any samples, made up an excuse as to why it happened, but Monsanto packed up and left and came here. Syngenta replaced Monsanto on that field, and these faculty members are walking and saying, we know there's going to be a Kona wind, and it's going to blow from the field into the school, and it's expected any time, so why are they powering up their pesticide applicators? And they applied the pesticide, and they had to rush 10 children to the hospital. Hundreds were sick, vomiting, headaches. And the investigation was squashed and diverted and distracted. And then it happened again 2 years later. Another 10 kids, another group stayed behind and suffered through it. The faculty are stricken with very serious disorders. I can name them. When they go away to the mainland, the problems go away. Some people have chronic coughs when they're at work, but not when they're at home. Children have blood in the pillow when they wake up because of nosebleeds. They have chronic asthma, ADHD, OCD, things I've heard from grandmothers lamenting about what they've heard from other grandmothers. And certain cardiac birth defects are 10 times higher than normal. So many of the kids don't make it. They're miscarried. They die young. Or one 2-year-old has already had 6 open heart surgeries in his young 2 years. And they're not being protected. They say, oh, don't worry. The levels are below that which the EPA has determined to be problematic. Well, I told you earlier that the FDA scientists were concerned about GMOs. Do you know what happened there? The person in charge of the policy of the FDA was Monsanto's former attorney, Michael Taylor. Later became Monsanto's vice president, then he went back to the FDA as the U.S. food safety czar under Obama. The EPA, those standards were set and influenced by industry. They set the standards for atrazine, for example, I think in 1991, the year before endocrine disruption was discovered and made popular. So all of their calculations related to toxicity and impacts are obsolete by at least 20 years. They don't look at the full Roundup. They look just at the glyphosate in all cases. They don't look at the combinations. They are designed to avoid finding the kind of problems that we're seeing in Kauai. And yet, the industry huddles behind those fake levels that they, in fact, created. And then there's Molokai. And there's stories of horrendous problems in the health of workers in Molokai. And they're instructed not to speak to anyone. They have to, I'm told, I don't know if this is true, they have to go to Monsanto doctors. They can control the information. Now in Kauai, many of the physicians in the hospital testified, saying it's the pesticides that are causing these massive problems. The governor appointed the CEO, the new CEO of the hospital, the attorney to the biotech companies. He's now in control of what information gets out of the hospital. So the situation is this: we cannot trust the federal government in this regard. I talked to a member of the Department of Agriculture 10 years ago on Kauai, and I said, what do you do when you approve? She was the one that approves the field trials. So Monsanto comes, and this overworked, very sincere woman is like, sure, test your products. Just here's your land. There was no criteria, there was no evaluation. And I gave her some recommendations. I said, you're putting a new organism into an open-air field. And you don't even know what it is, so you don't know how to test it. You should have the test kit as a requirement and money to pay for the third-party testing. And the company should have catastrophic weather plans in case of tornado or flooding to prevent spreading of seeds and whatnot. And if there is contamination, as we know from the Starlink contamination in 2000, I worked at the GMO detection laboratory that discovered it, it cost $1 billion. Kona coffee makers insisted that no outdoor planting of GM coffee takes place in the Big Island. That was years ago, because they know if it did, it could wipe out their premiums. They saw what happened with papaya. 50% of the industry disappeared, 40% of the farmers left, and the price of papaya went from $1.29 per kilo to about 80 cents below the cost of production because Japan wouldn't take it. So there is economic consequences, so you need to have an insurance policy or a bond to protect. That's just contamination. What about the soil? What about the air? What about the long-term glyphosate residues? The longest recorded half-life for glyphosate degradation was 22 years. No one is even looking at what's happening here. So no one is protecting at the state level. No one is protecting at the county level. And yet, in the Constitution, it gives rights to nature. What a relief, what a joy. And in there is a never used opportunity for the people to create laws. That was found by the Shaka movement in the books. No one had used it. And what greater opportunity than this to uphold the Constitution, to protect the Aina, to protect the Keiki? What greater opportunity when no one is protecting at any other level, and you're looking at huge health repercussions and I don't mean long-term, I mean permanent changes in the Aina. Once the pollen is released, it doesn't read the signs. It self-propagates year after year, generation after generation, it is passed on as a contaminated gene pool. It outlasts the effects of global warming and nuclear waste. The only thing that lasts longer than pollution of the gene pool is extinction. And that is what is happening right here on this island and these islands. So I cannot think of a better issue to invoke this never used authority. And what it does is it changes the dynamic. How many people, when I was giving the death, disease, destruction, and despair, how many people felt angry? Raise your hand. How many people felt sad? Raise your hand. How many people felt fear? Raise your hand. Well, when we take that information in, we can choose how we want to digest it. I want to make a recommendation. This is an opportunity to reverse thrust, to change the way we digest this information. Inside the seeds of those emotions is motivation for change. And I would like to ask that you mine right now, in this moment, whatever emotions that you have available, and switch any hint of victim, switch it to victor. Yes. Any hint of hopelessness into fierce action. That this is the time right now, and this is actually the movement, because what does it do? It's saying, those leaders are not serving us, so now we're the leaders. And this is where we take the power back. And I'll add one thing before we end. We can take some questions. I love the culture of Hawaii. I love the way that it respects the land and the children and the 7 generations in the future, and also the heart. It is such a refreshing feeling. It's almost as if the entire structure of the land is to enliven the heart. And the culture of the Hawaiians is so heart-based and family-based. And I want to say, being a visitor to this island for the second time, I am so pleased and honored and grateful to see how this movement has not left the heart behind, but is taking it with and going forward, so that as you spread the information, you build community. And as you build community, you build your vision of how you want your world to be and the world to be for the next 7 or more generations. The world is watching Maui, but the world is also learning from Maui, and I will take that learning and share it all over the world as I go. So thank you. Please join us. Help end the genetic engineering of the food supply. Protect yourselves, protect the world. We will win this. Thank you very much.
Quick question. Condé Nast Day Traveler has voted Maui Island of the Planet for 16 years in a row. Should we start a campaign to really tell the truth?
Wow. So the interesting thing is this. It is so obvious to those of us who understand the issue that it's also a tourist issue. And with the continued degradation of the health and land, then that will be affected. I think speaking the truth is in general a good idea. And I think that it should be easy, it may not be, but it should be easy to bring the entire tourist industry on the side of the Shaka movement, because that actually lays the foundation for a healthy tourist industry, for a healthy Aina and economy. So I'd say for the economists in the audience, for those that want to put that together, that will be a very useful set of exhibits and ideas to share in the next few months.
Thank you. I want to thank Mr. Smith and those here for accenting such marvelous qualities as sustainable Hawaiian agriculture, keiki, and the Aina. Obviously, we all care very much. This is more in the line of a request of those here. It's not always easy to follow up, and it's not always easy to do research, as you well know, as a scientist. Yet, I would ask those here to read in the Maui Weekly for February 6 to 12, as I said, it's a request, to read, if they will, the article by Peter J. Davies, PhD. 2 weeks later, there was a follow-up letter by Judy Eagle, and I'd be delighted to mention 2 or 3 sentences from it. But as you might imagine, the opinions that PhD reaches and those of the scientists he quotes are considerably different. Thank you so much for your presence here and for the gorgeous flowers, which I'm confident were produced in an organic way.
Thank you.
Actually, they were on organic farms.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, everybody. Is everybody still awake? Yeah. All right. Way to go for everyone sticking through to the end. My name's Tyler Woodard. I studied molecular biology at UH Hilo. I've been in Hawaii since I was 18 years old for the great majority of it. Love it. I've been following this movement since the inception. I've gone to the gatherings, the speakings, the rallies. I think that we're creating a great movement, but we need better marketing. We need better political marketing. He was commenting earlier that we've been accused of using fear-mongering. They use fear-mongering. They lie, they cheat, they steal. They do not play nice. They play dirty. Does anybody know about Indian warfare and how that started? During the War for Independence, the colonists adopted the fighting style of the Indians, hiding behind bushes, not marching in formation to be slaughtered by the cannons. I think we could take note from this. Look at how George Bush won the election with help from his crew. They used hot, emotional button issues. They used simple rhetoric to get to people's emotional guts, to inspire them through fear to go out and vote. I say we adopt some of those methods. We don't need to lie to be fearmongers. We can tell the truth and be fearmongers, because this shit is scary. I don't want to be infertile. I don't want to have a deformed baby. No, I have a comment for the entire movement that we need to change our style of rhetoric. I salute you and all of the fine educated people here, but we need to dumb down the level of discourse. We need to simplify. We need to use titties and beer and fart jokes, because that's what appeals to the masses. How about we have a commercial where you've got a beautiful Polynesian local woman coming out of the ocean like a James Bond movie with her breasts all shiny, and this gorgeous Hawaiian man with rippling abs. That's gonna get people's attention. And then they get together, there's romance, they have a baby, that baby is deformed and has a cleft palate. Boom, you just got people's attention. And you could say, hey, maybe that was the atrazine or the glyphosate that caused this. Maybe you wanna go register to vote. Maybe you wanna show up and vote. What's worse, ignorance or apathy? I don't know, and I don't give a shit. Let's get the message out. If a flyer says atrazine on top, nobody's gonna show up to that. Nobody likes chemistry, biology, biochemistry, mathematics. You know, some people do, I do. But the great voting public does not. This is not a representative cross-section of the entire population here tonight. Listen to commercials on the radio like Suck 'em Up Plumbing. They use drinking beer to sell sewer services. Let's appeal to the level of discourse that's going on the radio already, on the TV already, the common level of discourse. When we get intelligent and start speaking in college prep or university level language, it goes over people's heads. They turn their ears off, they turn their brains off, they do not listen, they do not register to vote, they do not vote. You say that we can do it with leaving couch potato Joe six-pack at home, changing channels, and we'll do it for him. I see an opportunity here with this health movement, with this Shaka movement, to unify the disparate ethnic and different communities on this island into one community. This is an opportunity. We can use the fear of death, deformities, impotency, infertility, which is what's happening. You see infertility rates of 45% in cows. You know, that's gonna start expressing itself in the human population too. I want us to get a political marketing guru and start putting some of our resources into advertising on the television and radio at the suck 'em up level to get everyone on this island's attention. Everybody here is very thoughtful and reflective, and that's a wonderful thing, and that's what I want to see globally happen is people be thoughtful and reflective and self-accountable. But we need to wake people up. We need to get their attention. Let's do that.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. We have 6 months of all different types of plans. In fact, there's 28 different modalities in which we will be employing, reaching out to all different communities. Bumpy Kanahale, if anyone knows who he is, from the nation of Hawaii, and he is oh, come on, Joe, I'm sorry, I'm just losing it. He is calling forth all of those who are in the sovereignty movement and all of the local communities to step forward. Alika, Atai is doing the same. Many Ali'is are coming together. The Ahamoku, which are the environmental Hawaiians who are looking after the Aina, are very concerned about these poisons desecrating the bones of their ancestors. And they're about to reach out in that way because they wish not to have their ancestors desecrated. So there are many things that are going to be coming forward over the next 6 months. But thank you so much for your passion, and let's turn that passion into a reality and really reach out to everyone on in this island and within our community. Yeah.
You know, even if we're 100% avoiding GMOs, I have no doubt that we're all getting some anyway, one way or another. So my question is, with all the studying that you've done on this subject for so long, what are the best products or supplements that one can take to detoxify from this stuff?
I'm actually interviewing doctors and medicine and scientists about that question. The great news is that people, as we saw at the very beginning, when people get rid of GMOs, they get better from all sorts of things. And that's the same thing with mice. When they were fed GM soy for 8 months, 14% GM soy, they had damage to their pancreas, liver, and testicles. Then some were put on non-GM soy for a month after that, and there was a reversal in large part of these problems. So, like, I don't know of anyone that has a system to verify colonization of gut bacteria and whatnot, but the good news is people are getting better, and that doctors are reporting that this is a very, very powerful strategy for getting people well again. I am doing research, and as I get more, I'll tell the world with that. To avoid GMOs, here are the steps. You can buy organic. It doesn't require testing for GM contamination, but it's not allowed to intentionally use GMOs. You can buy products that say non-GMO on the label, and if it's non-GMO project verified, it does require testing. But even whether it's non-GMO project verified or organic, there may be some level of contamination. It's not a guarantee. You can buy products listed on our shopping guide at nongmoshoppingguide.com. Also, there's an iPhone application, Shop No GMO. It's free. Or you can avoid the at-risk ingredients. There are 9 GM food crops: soy, corn. These are listed in the shopping guide. And there's some samples outside, I think. Soy, corn, cotton, seed oil, canola, sugar from sugar beets, alfalfa used as hay, papaya from Hawaii or China, zucchini and yellow squash. There's no more tomatoes or potatoes that are genetically engineered. The seedless watermelon is not GMO. It's just those 9, plus the milk and meat of animals that have been feeding on GMOs. And then the dairy from products from animals that have been injected with genetically engineered bovine growth hormone. There's a few things that come from genetically engineered microorganisms like aspartame. But our main focus right now is on those 9 plus animal feed. And you can basically make a choice of what works for you. There's no scientific evidence that a particular level is safe or unsafe. We can't say that, that it's okay to be loose or that it have to be tight. You just have to choose intuitively, logically, based on your lifestyle, how you can avoid. And our shopping guides will help you in that way. And if you are noticing symptoms that got better, you can email us at healthy@responsibletechnology.org. Let us know the symptoms that improved. And if you're a physician or a veterinarian, please share those about your patients in a proper confidential manner, because we're collecting that information.
Jeff, Monsanto and Syngenta are profit-seeking organisms. Even though there are many benefits to pursuing our mission in the way we're doing it, heart-based and as an ohana, there are many of us who have questions. We'd like your advice as to how perhaps we can go after Monsanto financially more directly. I mean, the Aaron Brockovich methodology is very compelling. And if we can put together a class action lawsuit, some strategies in parallel with what we're doing as a grassroots, I believe that's going to help accelerate their response to leave our island. Can you give us some advice on that, please?
We're looking at class action lawsuits. I can't share it in public. I can say that court cases are not reliable sources of justice. Yesterday, there was an announcement out of Australia that an organic farmer who was decertified because of contamination from a neighbor's GM canola did not win his case. There was a friend of mine that tried to do a class action lawsuit on behalf of farmers against the biotech industry, I think Monsanto, and they turned down his request for class action. The New York Times then reported that the judge never disclosed that he was the lawyer of record for Monsanto in the past. Clarence Thomas, a former Monsanto attorney, is now a Supreme Court judge, almost never writes opinions, wrote the opinion that was in favor of Monsanto and biotechnology. So we have some ideas for class action court cases. As a strategist, I've looked at different ways to end GMOs, and doing research is not a guarantee, even if the research is airtight. The best research in the world on GMO health effects has been attacked viciously, in some cases retracted, distorted, denied. Sometimes the equal and opposite fake research gets published that's designed to cause a confusion so people can say, well, it's not clear, even though that one was designed with unscientific principles. So even with good research, you can end up with problems. We see that politics is a problem in general. I was flown by the Polish government to give a press conference with their Minister of Environment about GMOs and against GMOs, and the next week that government was voted out of office. So in terms of human health lawsuits, there's certain criteria that require a number of tests, and what happens is when a scientist discovers a problem, they're threatened, attacked, fired, denied tenure, denied funding, and it's very well known. It was written up in Nature, everyone knows it. And what it has done, it has suppressed the desire for most scientists to do research in this field. So hundreds of them won't do any research in this field. There's very few that will. It's very hard to get the money. It's nearly impossible to get the seeds. And then if you do the research, it's hard to get published. So in order to get the criteria for a class action or even an individual plaintiff, you usually need more firepower than we have. The most reliable strategy we have seen is what we've talked about in terms of the tipping point. And also what's happening now, lighting the fire of the truth behind all these different locales. We have counties coming up and passing local legislation, which is, so we saw what happened with Oregon. The year before was with San Juan County, Washington, and then we had other counties in California declare non-GM free zones. And what's happening here and in Kauai is also, that's a perfect example. So I look at the strategy all the time, and I look at labeling strategy, and there's some advantages to labeling strategy and some disadvantages to labeling strategy. I don't need to go into it now, but I can talk to you more individually.
Okay. Your last question, or we have two more here? Ah, excellent. I didn't see it behind the amp. Okay, here you go.
So how long are we going to go, Joe?
About 5 more minutes.
All right.
Great, I'll make this a very quick question. Thank you for sharing your skill at distilling down all of these facts. I've been hearing a lot of different things about colony collapse disorder. Some people talk about deformed wing virus, some people talk about gut bacteria, some people talk about interference RNA. Can you distill down some of what you believe is causing some of the colony collapse disorder from what you've heard?
Okay, so bees are dying at very large numbers. They have a culprit in mind, neonicotinoid insecticides. Insecticides from tobacco that you create a kind of a time release in the seeds, and it produces systemically in the plant for several weeks. Now, GMO seeds often have 5 times the amount of neonicotinoids added before the BT, root worm killer kicks in. They have to protect the roots. There's also research and evidence supporting that in addition to the neonicotinoids, glyphosate is also a contributor, and I'm going to be releasing a film on that or an interview with Dr. Huber very soon. So make sure you're signed up at responsibletechnology.org for all of the information. We have a speaker training coming up at the end of June, which if you don't make it on the weekend for an online course, you can just get it anytime and get the recording. We have a tipping point network of local groups, about 10,000 people, and we have a very active newsletter. So we think that there's a combination of neonicotinoid and probably glyphosate, but then you also have the bees drinking high fructose corn syrup over the winter, which is from genetically engineered corn, and you have the gut bacteria change, and one study showed that the bees that were exposed to the GM pollen ended up with a viral infection, and those that were not didn't get it, suggesting but not proving that it compromises the immune system. So it's not nailed down, but neonicotinoids is pretty nailed down as one of the contributors.
I'll try to make this quick, and I hope it comes out eloquent enough. We're talking a lot about nature, and but the whole planet's ecosystem is out of whack at this point, and this is one part of the whole. And I'd like to hear this. This guy was making all his suggestions. I'd like to hear more of the nature. The animals that can't speak for themselves, the birds and the butterflies that fly through all this. And then pass it on. It's there's a decline in the whole hemispheres of birds, butterflies, etc. So what comes to mind is that great, elegant speech by Chief Seattle. What happens to the animals happens eventually to man. That's what's happening. Animals are getting birth defects.
Hold it closer to your mic.
Animals are getting birth defects too. They're not moms that go into the Safeway and get to pick and choose. We're just laying this heavy trip on nature now.
Thank you. I don't have time to go into my storehouse of that information, but I'll tell you why I don't spend as much time on the impact on nature, even though I know a lot of it. When I teach speaker training, I talk about structure follows strategy. What you talk about is based on what your goals are. Our goal is to create a tipping point of consumer rejection. So it's very easy to get people angry at Monsanto, but to actually avoid the corn chip, that's what I'm looking for. So it's like I had this image of a Greenpeace person harvesting, so to speak, a GM field, cutting it down, and then going and celebrating in a pub and eating corn chips. And so my my strategy is to drive behavior change for millions and millions of people. And we're successful. In 2007, 15% of Americans said that they avoid or reduce GMOs. In 2010, 25%. In 2013, 39%. Non-GMO labeled products are the fastest new label claim in America. In 2012, they were the fastest growing category, 26% increase in sales. It was 24% the next year, second fastest in the country. It's unbelievable what's happening. We've reached a critical mass, and now we're looking for the tipping point. And that comes from me, from message discipline. I could talk about patents. I could talk about the farmer's plight. I can talk about the environmental issues. And I can get people angry, and I can get people motivated, but I want them to avoid the GM corn chips and the GM soybeans. And so that's why I decided to focus on the health issue, and I've been the leading spokesperson on the health issue for more than a decade, because to me, I feel like that lights the fire of people to then step up and come up with these great ideas and to protect their kids and to protect their families and to apply themselves, because that's the energy that I think is moving this entire movement. So I'm dedicated to that, even though I know some people are more motivated by nature, and some people live imbibing nature as part of their faith and way of life. And so I know consciously that I'm not touching those buttons with them. And so I may not meet your criteria, but it's by choice and it's very well thought out. It's to create this change.
I understand. It's like I say, there's so many problems in the world. It's just
Right, exactly. Well said. I think I got one more minute, so quick questions and I'll answer.
Hi, my name is Nadia. I'm the owner of Bee Hawaiian, B-E-E, Hawaiian. I love the bees and am here to learn how to support creating something that Jerry Damon and I discussed a while back called green-collar jobs. I want to get ahead of the movement. I want to be on the front of the wave, and I want to provide places for people when they do quit their jobs and walk away from Monsanto's and never look back to come have a home and know that they can feed their children, pay their rent, and have healthy food and live a long, beautiful life here in Maui. So my question is, when I heard about your support for the children and the keikis for education, do you have a board of directors that is in charge of creating this new wave, creating the ground, the land from which all these movements are going to come from? For example, if we all here decide we want to go have a cup of coffee or a meal after being at the MACC, where are we going to go? Denny's? And eat GMOs? Is that what we're going to do? What are we going to do? We need to get ahead of the movement. We need to get the grassroots planting of, here is our structure, here's our home, this is where we live, we know where we're going to go.
So yesterday, thank you, that beautiful point. Yesterday we had a meeting at the Maui Farmers Union United. And I didn't want to talk about what I was going to talk about tonight there because I didn't want to repeat myself. And we focused almost entirely on this. And we had a working group of 40 people that stayed afterwards to create a vision of a transformation of Maui. So talk to Joe about how to get involved with that group, because obviously you should totally be part of that group so your vision and your action can be part of that. Yes.
Okay, last question.
Aloha. I just want to share with you quickly the story of hope. I know everyone has some sort of hope. Before you have hope, a lot of us have to experience great pain, and this movement is about trying to rectify that pain that's been placed upon us, not as victims, but as warriors. And my story personally is one as a warrior. I was diagnosed with all these scary statistics. Everyone's terrified of death and disease. About disease and GMOs, I was diagnosed with severe ulcerative colitis in 2006. Terminal conditions of 4 feet of my intestines to be cut out, which I refused. I said I will heal myself. And drawn to Maui, and drawn to the jungle, drawn to real food, I healed myself, which is entirely possible for every kind of pain. Whatever you experience, whatever it is healable with real food, with real medicine, with the earth, with Maui, that we have to protect in the community. And I admire you all. I think you're all beautiful. I'm sorry, my heart. Thank you. I just want to inspire all of you with this healing energy that's in the ground that we must protect. Mahalo.
Thank you.
Thank you, sister. Wow.
That was a beautiful, beautiful story to end on. I know Joe has some announcements, so please don't just rush out because Joe has to end the night. But what's happening here is very exciting. I've been on the road for 11 years. I traveled 8 months of the year last year, and I don't know if I'll beat it this year. I hope not. But what's happening here is amazing. And I want you to know I've spent some time with Joe and Bruce and Satya and the leaders, and you have an amazing group of leaders. Absolutely amazing. Joe's only putting, 80, 90 hours a week in this, maybe 100. So I recommend strongly that you have as much fun as possible contributing to the Shaka movement, to figure out how you can integrate it into your life between now and the election, using your skills, your friendship, your connection, whether you want to be a click and send revolutionary and simply do the Facebook deal, or whether you want to go out there and talk to people, whether you want to become a speaker, all sorts of things. But really use the energy right now, right tonight, to consider how you want to commit to participate. Because if you wait tomorrow to make that decision, or the next day, all the energy from tonight will get less and less and less, and it won't translate into action, and that means it's a great loss for the community because it won't have you to participate in. So really, I would say before you go to bed tonight, just think how you choose to be a victor in this, and how you choose to support those who came out and acted funny in the beginning and attracted you and attracted others, so we can create a movement. Thank you very much.
Jeffrey Smith, everyone.